In 2013, Archie Comics released Sonic and Megaman Worlds Collide, a crossover between two of their biggest runs at the time in an epic story spanning a dozen issues. It combined the ongoing storylines of the Sonic and Megaman comic runs together, and the titular heroes teaming up to defeat the combined efforts of their two evil scientist nemeses. 2 years later, this crossover would get a sequel, this time called Worlds United. This crossover was even bigger than the last one, because now it was no longer a crossover of Sonic and Megaman, but a crossover between the IPs of both Sega and Capcom altogether. Thus we got cameos from Mega Man X, Knights, Street Fighter, Okami, Beautiful Joe, Skies of Arcadia, and many more. The story ends with Super Sonic and Super Mega Man defeating the main villain Sigma, and due to some Genesis Wave hijinks, whatever that means, the events of the entire story are completely undone and the world is saved. This crossover was beloved by everyone, and is held as a crowning example of what a crossover between two different franchises can look like if the creative team behind it really love the properties they're working on, and the companies aren't stingy about what the creative teams can and can't do. But what if I told you that this duology was meant to be a trilogy? It was revealed by Ian Flynn, the writer for both crossovers, that there was a third event planned that was supposed to come out 2 years after the second one. Inspired by the original Secret Wars event from Marvel, the characters of Sonic, Mega Man, and probably many other properties were going to be transported to a battle world type area and forced to duke it out with one another. From the insider information that Ian provided, it seemed like it would have been a very fun event. He also revealed that it wasn't just going to be a two-way crossover, there was one last franchise that he wanted to include.
It's me, Mario!
Ian explains that he planned for Mario and some other members of his cast to also be transported into this arena of clashing IPs, and intended for them to serve as the point of view angle for the audience. Not only that, but Ian had prepared a 4-issue miniseries for a standalone Mario comic to be pitched to Nintendo as an ongoing Archie series. Unfortunately, Worlds at War was never pitched to Nintendo, and Archie lost the publishing rights to the Sonic franchise the same year the crossover would have come out. To add insult to injury, the standalone comic was shut down by Nintendo of Japan, thus entering the realm of lost media that might have been, alongside Tim Burton's Superman Unchained and 37 different Guillermo del Toro projects. But what if this comic wasn't cancelled? Furthermore, what if it was given to a talented creative team that really cared about the world of Mario and wanted to make something special with this unique opportunity? How do you adapt something as episodic and whimsical as Mario into a serialized medium like comics, while still having it feel true to the heart of the world? Unfortunately, I am not that talented creative team that I just mentioned. I'm just an amateur writer that really likes the Mario series, and that's enough for me in this instance. Today I'm going to be playing a game of fanfiction disguised as an analysis video, and talk about what I would do if I was put in charge of writing a Mario comic. Not just any Mario comic though, a comic that feels true to the source material while also providing a cool and unique vision for this wonderful universe. Taking inspiration from the games, movies, and other comic adaptations that came before it to see if I can come up with my perfect Mario comic series. Will it be great or will it be trash? Only one way to find out. Despite the cancelled Archie run, Mario's no stranger to the comic format. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Mario-kun manga, as well as the old Nintendo Power comics, but there have been a few other Mario mangas that have existed in the past, like the Kodansha Mario manga, which ran for nearly 10 years, which is crazy to think about, because I've never heard of this until like a few days ago. The question just comes from how we want to adapt the story. To me, there are 3 very important aspects of this adaptation that need to be addressed in order for this comic to feel like Mario: direction, characterization, and tone. The way the story is told, the way the characters are handled, and the overall tone of the comic. Once you get these 3 things down, the rest of the comic should theoretically write itself. Let's start with the direction. There are many ways to make an adaptation, and any one of them can be successful if given to a creative team that cares about the original property, which unfortunately is an issue that has plagued many adaptations over the last few years, not just video games. Some choose to just be a direct adaptation of the story from start to finish, like many anime adaptations of manga. Some are more of a reinterpretation of the original story rather than directly copying it, like many of the live-action Disney movies, or they can be completely new stories that are just using the original stories as a baseline or inspiration, like almost every superhero movie ever made, really. Finding the right kind of adaptation to go with depends on a few factors: the media you're adapting in the first place, and the media you're adapting it into. In this case, adapting a whimsical, episodic, normally unserious video game series like Mario into a hypothetical, serialized comic series could be done in a few different ways. It could be done like the IDW Sonic comics, which takes place within the world of the mainline games and is meant to basically fill in the gaps between them. Or it could be something like the Archie comics, which are just a completely new continuity entirely, and have lore completely disconnected from the games to the point where it's incredibly confusing. Neither one of these approaches really work for me though. The spin-off approach definitely works for Sonic and helps fleshing out its wider world while also doing the absolute best to ignore literally every human character ever. I don't feel like it works for Mario, however. Sonic and his cast function fundamentally differently than Mario's, and I don't feel like the simplistic characterizations of Mario and his cast would translate well to being dropped at a non-episodic formula that's already established. To me, it would just feel very odd and clunky. For something like this, I think it'd be better to take a page out of the book of Pokemon Adventures. For those of you who don't know, Pokemon Adventures is a manga adaptation of the Pokemon games, but the presentation is just entirely different. The stories are darker, the protagonists are given a lot more depth, the battles function fundamentally differently, characters straight up just die, and the stories normally go in radically different directions compared to the games, and it's overall just a very different vibe from any other piece of Pokemon media. It's by far my favorite video game adaptation of anything, and is absolutely my favorite piece of non-game Pokemon media. And I think its approach to adapting a game into a comic could serve as a great piece of inspiration here, using the original story as a baseline and adding an extra layer of depth to the one's basic stories, and introducing new plot lines to connect seemingly disconnected story arcs together. Another piece of inspiration here is actually from a YouTube series. I'm sure some of you are at least semi-aware of the YouTube channel called Beware. He does a lot of comic book and anime-based content, but his claim to fame are his fan-made Sonic Transformation series and his Lantern Court videos, which I'm sure most of you have seen. One of his more recent series revolves around him creating a single concurrent storyline for Sonic the Hedgehog as if the franchise was planned from the start. And I think this is the way that I'd want to approach this comic from a story and presentation angle. Taking all of these games, spin-offs, and disconnected pieces of lore and treat it like it's all part of one cohesive story and mythos. The Star Children, the Star Sprites, the various different kingdoms, and all the other little lore tidbits we get throughout the franchise, all fully fleshed out and connected in a way that still feels cohesive and natural. Despite the Mario franchise intentionally keeping itself light on lore to keep future storytellers that work on this series the creative freedom to do what they want, all of these bits of lore don't really contradict each other. In some cases, it feels like they could all be connected in a realistic way without causing too many plot holes. Except for, well, me personally, I'd place a bigger emphasis on the Star Children and provide an actual explanation for them. One of the biggest criticisms I saw from my video on the concept was that the idea of the stars granting these 7 children extraordinary power takes away from the idea that Mario is just a normal, athletic guy. And I get it, plenty of underdog stories have been soured in the past because there's some chosen one prophecy that's poorly integrated towards the middle or end of the story that devalues all of their achievements that came before because it was fated to happen. Now, calling a guy who can regularly throw around giant turtle dragons and take hits from gods and literal nightmare beings a normal guy is stretching the truth a little bit in my opinion, but I get the point they're making. It takes away from the idea that Mario, and by proxy Luigi, are just average Joes that got this absurd strength by working hard. But that isn't to say you can't make the Star Children work without compromising that down-to-earth direction. Perhaps these stars are keys to a very specific power, one that was once used to seal a great evil and now has reawoken, and now lies in the hands of these 7 warriors to reseal it through some training montage or something, just throwing ideas out there. Let's move on to the next big point that I think would be very easy to mess up if you have a less than average creative team: the characters. Translating Mario's wide cast of characters sounds easier than it is on paper. Because of how simple they are in nature, it would be very easy to mess up the characterization and lead to them feeling off. I mean, just look at the discourse about IDW and how it handles its Sonic cast. That should be proof alone of how important getting this stuff right is. Obviously, you're not going to make everyone happy with a certain interpretation. Everyone has their takes on how they think a character should be written, and no one attempt is going to coincide with everyone's preferences. But that being said, I think regardless of all of that, one thing that should remain an absolute constant in this comic is one thing: Mario should always feel like he's the main character. That feels like a silly thing to say, like of course Mario should be the main character, it's his franchise. But anyone who's been around the Mario franchise for long enough knows what I'm talking about. Mario is one of those franchises where your favorite character is very rarely the main one. With a cast of characters so diverse and with so many defined personalities, you'd be hard-pressed to find a large sum of people whose favorite character is the main man himself, besides yours truly, of course. Plus, Mario's in a strange position I see with similar characters like Batman and Goku, where after a certain point, the story stops focusing on them and their journey as the center point and starts moving towards the side characters. That's kind of one of my biggest fears of the upcoming Mario Galaxy movie right now, actually. Matt Reeves made it a point in his interviews leading up to the release of his Batman movie to highlight how he never wanted to lose sight of Bruce Wayne at the center of the story he wanted to tell. Because if the story is no longer focusing on Batman and is focusing instead on his villains or the Robins, why isn't the movie just about them instead? This is a train of thought that I'd want to translate to this comic. Throughout all the different side characters that I'd undoubtedly bring in from all different corners of the universe, Mario should still feel like he's the main character, and not feel like he's being overshadowed by the rest of the cast. You can still have arcs and moments dedicated to the side characters like Peach, Luigi, and Bowser. You'd still have your Luigi's Mansions, Peach Showtimes, Bowser's Inside Stories, and Wario Land plotlines, but above it all, Mario should still remain the focus. I want his boundless optimism, deep human understanding, and ability to inspire good in others to be fully displayed here. One piece of criticism I've seen since I've started making these videos is that Mario and his cast by proxy don't get many chances to flesh out their established personalities just because of the nature of the mainline games, with the only real exception being the various RPGs. However, in a comic like this, you're sort of forced to give these characters more depth, because otherwise your audience will get bored fast. I don't need Mario to go on any deep retrospective arc or realization or anything. I think keeping him as a static, positive character who's more about changing the world around him than changing himself is the best way to approach his specific character, especially in an ongoing series like this. But I would want to see an ongoing development arc for Luigi as he learns to be more courageous outside of his brother's influence. I talked at length about Luigi and how I think his insecurities come less from being jealous of Mario's fame and more from admiration of his bravery and fearlessness. And I'd want that to be highlighted here, probably in a dedicated Luigi's Mansion arc, but also just throughout the ongoing story. Furthermore, I'd want their unity as brothers to stay steadfast throughout the entire thing. When Ian summarized the plot of the 4-issue pitch he made for Nintendo, he mentioned that Mario and Luigi would have a bit of a falling out, just for Luigi to make the save on Mario against Bowser in the climax. And I don't really like that idea, and apparently neither did Ian. One of the most crucial aspects of this world is the relationship between Mario and Luigi, and I want that to be completely apparent and clear that these two brothers love each other. They can disagree on things, sure, but I never want them to actually, get into a big argument and then break up, right? I want it to be completely apparent and clear that these two brothers love each other no matter what. And the movie actually did a good job of highlighting this dynamic, and I think taking inspiration from that specific take is the way to go. Moving on to other characters, I want Peach's mindset as a ruler to be explored as well, to really dive into her role as the heart of not only Mario's group of friends, but the kingdom as well. Her flaws as a people pleaser and also her strengths as a great support role for Mario on adventures with her heart magic. I'd want to get more introspection on Bowser, his relationship with Junior and the rest of his kids, and learn more about the mindset of his minions and why they follow him so devoutly. This could also be a chance to give light to side characters that haven't really had much limelight, let alone characters that have ever been put into a story like this. One thing about the IDW comics that I enjoy is their inclusion of many of the side characters that have gotten the shaft over the last decade or so. Not as much anymore with all the new original characters taking up more page time, and that's also something I'd want to avoid. Mario already has such a wide variety of characters, both major and minor, that could fill any sort of narrative role if you're willing to give them the time of day. And while I really enjoyed the original characters that the IDW Sonic comics have introduced throughout its run, I feel like with the more they add, the more time it's taken away from allowing the original legacy characters to fulfill roles that these new ones have already filled. In this comic, I'd want to give some of the characters a platform that they never really had before. Guys like Daisy, Wario, Waluigi, the main green Yoshi, even Donkey Kong to an extent, just to name a few. And also bring back one-off characters like Geno, Mallow, Cappy, Starlo, and various other side characters from the series. Lastly is the tone, which is a much more important factor than you're probably thinking. I think a lot of people, when they write out their own Mario-centered fan stories, while they might be good, they try to make it more serious, or make it similar in style to something like Sonic or Super Mario Bros. Z. Don't get me wrong, I love Super Mario Bros. Z, and it has had a massive influence on my love for sprite animations. I thought the characterization of everyone was great, but it is very much not a Mario series. And the same can be said for a lot of the other sprite series that chose to follow in its footsteps. A lot of the time, those shows just revolve around the Sonic cast that's also there, and Mario is more or less just there for the setting of the Mushroom Kingdom and to have that fun crossover feel. For this comic, I want to make sure that it still captures that whimsical and easygoing feeling of the games. Everything's colorful, it still feels a bit silly and cartoony since that vibe is still integral to it feeling like Mario, but just because the franchise is generally cartoonish and doesn't have as much serious or dramatic writing, doesn't mean that you can't tell serious or personal stories with these characters in this format at all. There have been plenty of stories told both within and outside mainline games that are very dramatic and invoke many different deep emotions. And if we're already taking some of these stories, putting them into this comic and adding an extra bit of spice on top of it, capturing something similar wouldn't be hard to do. Keeping the general vibe of the games and world while also knowing when to take a certain scene more seriously when the situation calls for it is how you avoid feeling like a fanfiction or a terrible parody animation. With all that established, how would I start this comic? What would the first issue look like? Well, many reinterpretations of the first Mario game start out mostly the same way, with Mario and Luigi discovering the Mushroom Kingdom, then going on a mission to save Peach, or Luigi in the movie's case. Bowser is defeated, Peach or Luigi are rescued, then all is well. This storyline is pretty generic at this point, but it is effective, and I think I'd likely start it somewhat similar. But I'd make it a point to make sure that Mario and Luigi meet Peach before she's kidnapped, to establish that relationship. The would-be Archie comic would have started with Mario and Luigi arriving after an attack from Bowser and Peach already captured, but I think it would work better if they arrived before and were present during the invasion. That way, Mario and Luigi would establish a relationship and connection with Princess Peach right away, right before she's captured by Bowser. Mario, being the heroic and selfless man that he is, would encourage Luigi for the both of them to follow Bowser's ship and go get her back. then the rest of that beginning story would play out basically how you'd expect. The storylines after that I think would be more episodic and would take inspiration from many of the early Mario games and would exist to establish many of the main cast that would eventually become mainstays. Bowser's plotting something on Dinosaur Island. They go to stop them, that's how they meet Yoshi. They go to Sarasaland to meet Princess Daisy, she gets kidnapped by Wario, Mario and the gang have to save her. They all go on vacation, Peach gets kidnapped by Bowser Jr. and that's how we meet him, so on and so forth. But over time, more and more story-based characters would start getting introduced, like Rosalina, Fawful, the Shroobs, Geno, Mallow, etc., and more serialized plotlines would begin to take form. I unfortunately don't have time to talk about every single arc that I have in mind for this comic, so if you guys would like videos in the future where I actually write them out in like an audio drama or something like Troy Boyo's pre-write videos, let me know. I'd be down for doing something like that. In conclusion, I hope you enjoyed me rambling about hypothetical Mario comic books for 20 minutes. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I've been doing so much thinking about the presentation of the story that was never meant to be, especially recently. I'm kinda getting my fix with the movies, but the direction of the second one has me slightly worried. I don't really think it has the creative freedom on the same planet as what the comic would have, and it kinda bums me out. Unfortunately, a lot of Mario's more serialized stories are in the background, taking place in spin-off RPGs or in heavily mandated and course-corrected movies, so it leaves Mario and his franchise most of the time feeling very brand safe in a similar way that Spider-Man and Mickey Mouse are, which is unfortunate because I still feel like there's potential for a real serialized story that centers around Mario and his universe. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I made a video about this exact trope a few years ago, and I'm not really proud about how that video turned out, so hopefully I was able to make this topic a bit more interesting the second time around. If you'd like me to make more videos about this hypothetical Mario comic in the future, like I said, audio dramas or me just explaining how I would write certain stories, please let me know. I'd love to do something like that. I don't know how I do it, but it's something that I would definitely be down to do in the future. So just let me know if you have suggestions, that as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.